Um, my name is Tsapo Kobe, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Gautrain Management Agency. With me, I am with Mr. Victor Shangi, who's the SEM responsible for project. I'm with Mohadi Manamela, who is our Executive Manager responsible for environmental issues. Taho Ramalebe, who you guys have been communicating with time and again. Now you can put a face to the name. And also Eleanor Tutalimadje, who works with her in the reputation and management. And then we have the IT gurus here. They said I mustn't introduce them, but I've got Dagalo here, who works with us as part of the IT crew, and they've made sure that people online can hear us clearly. We're going to appeal that when we speak, we will bring you a mic, speak into the mic, because the people online will be able to hear you. Whereas if you're shouting out everything else, we will not. So today's meeting in its intent, it's for us, as Trishana said, to share information, and then after sharing information, take your questions and concerns. And then from then onwards, then also, we're here to listen. That's the first and foremost thing, is I'm here to listen. I'm not here to tell you anything. But I will fill the questions that they collect. We will have two presentations. In the last meeting that we had, the presentation might seem a little bit lengthy, but it's intended to be as detailed as possible. And in the last meeting that we found that people were asking things that were already contained in the presentation that they had stopped. And it became a bit embarrassing when I had to say, had you not stopped the presentation, you would have known that. So I do appeal for what do they call it, for us to run through that. I have separated out the presentations, we've streamlined them, I've taken out things that repeat and everything else. So we will not be as lengthy as we would be. I would also appeal that we're a bit way away from actually digging up people's gardens. There's a process that is going to unfold, and that process is regulated by law and the environmental laws by the Gauteng Transport Infrastructure Act, and processes that must occur that protect both me and you. Years back, when I was still young and handsome, I had to go through this in 2005 when we built the Gautrain the first time. So I was there, boots and all, on the ground. Much younger, I had much more energy, and my beard was a bit more a different color. And we've done this and we worked through this, and we are here because we're starting this early. As if I had followed process, it would have just been, well, at this part of what do they call it, of the process, we don't really need to engage directly. But we've learned from the last process, and we want to be able to hear you and be able to work with you to be able to take it forward. And so in that spirit, I would love for us to appeal to, we are all concerned. We are all worried about numerous things. We all are worried about communities that might be cut off and all the worries. But before we get into that, I'm going to call Victor Shangi up to come and talk to the process as it's envisaged by the law. And then I'll bring up Mohadi immediately after that to talk to your rights as per the National Environmental Act, the NEMA, and its detail and the manner in which we're going to follow it. So before we get there, we are very proud of the brand we've created. And we are not going to tarnish it by doing something wrong. It's one of the most valuable things owned not only by what do they call it, by the Gauteng government, but it's owned by government anyway. It is an important brand, and we would not do anything for us to be able to damage that. We've just been notified by the Auditor General that we have received our 10th Clean Audit as an organization. Now, that in itself, there's very few organizations in government. We checked. There's only 2 of them that have actually maintained that record straight over that period of time. We're not going to do anything to jeopardize that. And me personally, as the COO, that is not going to happen under my watch. So be rest assured that I will, what do they call it? We will make sure that this gets done the right way, and it gets done with us following the legalities that needs to be followed. And with that, those few words, Mr. Shanghai, is your fancy computer working today? Okay, so let's try and what do they call it? Mr. Shanghai is the, what do they call it, is the actual project manager, and is also the registered project manager at Treasury. So when you're doing PPPs, you need to register the project manager with, what do they call it, with Treasury, to ensure that we have one person who deals with that. So if there's one person who speaks from a point of authority, it's him, and he is the, what do they call it, the most knowledgeable person here, and is also the project manager of the route determination process. So let's give him a chance to be able to speak to these things, and let's take it forward. Okay, we're up.
Sorry,
Roger?
before you start, is this being recorded?
I think so. I think that's what
It's just being streamed. I'm not
it's
sure
being
about
streamed. It's not being recorded. Oh, the meeting is being recorded. Okay. All right. So is that for me to behave or?
Hold you accountable.
Okay, hold me accountable. All right, that's fine.
Join the meeting so I can project.
Oh, okay. All right, we're just sorting out the logistical issues of making sure that the people online can actually see the presentation. Yeah, we have to share your email. Eventually, if everybody gets unhappy, they have to know who they come back to.
Oh, I'm not invited to the meeting.
So I think while we're still going through this, there's a question that comes up quite a lot, and that's it. How long until we start digging up people's gardens? So there's multiple processes that go on. So first and foremost is one of the first processes that needs to occur is for us to get what's called a Treasury Approval 1. So when you're doing a PPP according to Regulation 16, it's for us to be able to get Treasury Approval 1. Treasury Approval 1 says the initial pre-feasibility that you had done has been approved, and you are now allowed for you to go to the next level. And once that happens, so parallel to while we're waiting for the Treasury Approval 1, what we do is we do what we've done now. It's determine the route. And what is the route? The route is a 400-meter bend and strip that then the line can be anywhere in that 400 meters. And all of that. Now, it can be moved in any direction within that 400-meter bend. And then from then on, then what we do is we go into detailed design. And as we go into detailed design, what that allows us to do, it allows us to now pinpoint exactly what is tunnel, what is at grade, what is viaducts, what is parts of the line that will be in tunnels, in cut and cover tunnels, in bored tunnels, and all sorts of other things that have to happen. We are not yet at the point where the detail has been fleshed out. We still have to go into that, and throughout that whole entire process and everything else, we still have to come back to you time and again and listen to you on your concerns, your issues, and everything else that has to happen. So in terms of Treasury Approval 1, we have been given a conditional Treasury Approval 1. So after Treasury Approval 1, if I may explain the process, is that we go to Treasury Approval 2, and Treasury Approval 2 then approves our documents that we are to go to market with. That's Treasury Approval 2A. Treasury Approval 2B then gives us the go-ahead for us to be able to put the bids out into the market for people to bid on them. And then after that, then when it comes back, we do an assessment and an evaluation, and beyond that, then we get Treasury Approval 3A, and that is Treasury concurs with us that we've done this right. And then there's the end of it, which is the last Treasury approval, which is you can now place a contract. Now, the last time when we did this, that whole entire dance took almost close on to 5 years. Are you ready, Mr. Shange? I am getting tired of tap dancing. Okay. All right. If you're ready, then let me leave Mr. Shange to get on with it.
Good evening to all once again. As Tepo has mentioned or stated, my name is Victor Shange. And mine is just to take you through the process of defining the future rail reserve. This is just the outline of the presentation. I'll just give a 2-minute overview of the network extensions project, and then get into the detail then of the process, the reason why we are here tonight. Starting off with what is the network extensions project. So at the top is the process Tepo just outlined. It's governed by the Public Finance Management Act, and that is the process through which the project then was developed. And Tepo, as you've mentioned, has gone through the feasibility study phase, and it's in the Treasury approval processes. The part at the bottom, the part of defining the rail reserve, is governed by an act called the Gauteng Transport Infrastructure Act, or the GTIA. And I'm departing from here because as I go through the presentation, I'm going to make a lot of reference then to the GTIA, which, as I said, legislates the process through which a future railway reserve is identified and defined. Just quickly, in terms of what are the network extensions that have gone through this feasibility process, in the red is the current Gautrain network, the north-south line from Hatfield to Park. In the blue is the current east-west service from Sandton to Marlborough, and in the gold is the current airport service between Sandton and Ortia. The proposed extensions that went through the feasibility are what is in firstly as phase 1 is the green line, which is what we're here to discuss today. That is a connection then between Marlborough through Sandton, Randburg, Cosmos City and Little Falls. Phase 2 will connect from Little Falls to Jabulani in Soweto with the new station in Roodepoort. Phase 3 will connect from Samrand through Irene to Tshwane East. Phase 4 will come back to Cosmos City to Sunninghill Hill through Fourways, as well as from Rhodesfield to East Rand. And Phase 5, as currently proposed, will come back to Cosmos City and connect to Lanseria from Samrand and Sunninghill Hill, Tshwane East to Mamelodi, East Rand Mall to Boksburg. So those are the proposed extensions to the network. So moving along then to the process of defining the future railway line. As I'd mentioned, the GTIA is a piece of legislation that governs this process. And the very first step in this process is referred to as route determination. This is the process where a 400-meter one-line corridor within which a future railway reserve may be located is identified. It enables the MEC to have rights over any land use changes within this corridor. It prevents land speculation in and around the future network, and provides a basis for what is the next phase of determining the future railway reserve, which is referred to as preliminary design. Preliminary design is the one that then defines or refines the information to an extent where the actual cadastral boundaries may be identified for the future railway reserve. In essence, the process is initiated by the MEC, and you will see there's reference to both railway line or provincial roadway or road reserve. So the act applies to both. So The MEC then commissions a technical study of possible alignments. These alignments then are checked for environmental impact. Just to emphasize, this is not a full environmental impact assessment. It is a desktop assessment of what these possible railway line options may have in terms of an environmental impact. Thereafter, those possible route options are advertised and particulars of where they can be accessed by all interested and affected parties is advertised as, and you can, copies be made available, etc. And I'll get to how it was done for phase 1 just now. In this advert, an invitation then for all interested and affected parties is placed so that they may be given an opportunity to comment on these possible alignments. And of course, then there's the part about what is the impact should a route be determined. Thereafter, the MEC then considers the comments that are submitted by all interested and affected parties. From those comments, the MEC then, with the support of the technical team, may then either determine a route, or if there are issues that have come through from these interested and affected parties that require a commission, such a commission may be formed. So such a commission then would deal with particular issues. So if a Mr. Smith, sorry if it's a Mr. Smith in the room, where Mr. Smith submits a comment that the MEC deems requires a commission, then such, Mr. or Mrs. Smith then would be invited to this forum or this commission to further ventilate the issue that would have been deemed to be requiring a commission. If the MEC deems the information available to him, so after the assessment of the alignments, consideration of the public, interested and affected parties, members of the public, etc., have been considered, he may then opt to determine the route. So once the MEC has made the determination whether there's a commission or a route can be determined, then such a route is then published. So within government, so this process doesn't happen in a vacuum. So developing the network or extending the network is not happening in isolation of the overall spatial or strategic planning or economic planning of the government of Gauteng. And so there is some consultation with other members of the cabinet as part of this process. And so after having determined the routes, after consulting interested and affected parties through the process that's outlined in the Act, after consulting members of the cabinet as per the Act, then the route is determined, it is then gazetted in the provincial gazette. So this is as per the Act, and I'll get to how it was done for phase 1. And after the route is determined, so for instance, for phase 1, it was determined or published on the 25th of May 2022. The Act then says the MEC may, within a period of 30 days after the publication, receive requests from interested and affected parties where they have the right to request the basis on which he made the decision to determine the route. Just as a summary of the process, MEC initiates the process. A technical assessment of possible route alignment is undertaken. Those routes are tested against the environmental impact. There's stakeholder engagement, and interested and affected parties, what we refer to as public participation, because that's when it gets published, and then all interested and affected parties are invited to submit comments. The MEC then considers the comments. He may then determine the route, or as I mentioned, refer certain issues to a commission. The commission then is formed. It sits accordingly. It provides or produces a report for the MEC, and the route gets published. In terms of how it was done for phase 1, without repeating the steps, is MEC initiated the process in October 2018. The options were developed between October and July 2019. The environmental investigation then took place between July and November of the same year. The stakeholder consultation then commenced. And so the stakeholder consultation is where we consult bulk infrastructure service providers, local authorities, other MECs, members of the cabinet, etc. We then went through a public participation process between July and August of 2021. This is where we published the 3 possible route options with the supporting environmental impact report, when then for a period of 30 days, we were then inviting and receiving comment from various interested and affected parties. Now, the Act, as I mentioned, speaks about the publication being in the Provincial Gazette. We realize that the Gazette is not a widely known form of information. We then supplemented that requirement by publishing the route in 5 newspapers, having it on the GMA website, as well as running various social media campaigns to try and increase the awareness of this process of public participation. This is just to note the newspapers, Sowetan, The Star, The Beeld, Randburg Sun, Sentin Chronicle, GMA website, etc. Certain interested and affected parties would then request copies of these reports. Although you could download them from the website, we also made them available on memory sticks because it also coincided with the peak of COVID, so we want to minimize the risk of people touching the same document, etc. So what would have been published then on the was published on the 25th of May is then what is on the screen now. So Tsebo mentioned the 400-meter wide corridor. So what was published then in the dotted lines are the 2 edges of this 400-meter wide corridor within which the future railway reserve can be designed, constructed, etc. So in terms of what does it mean, what is the legal implication for a route being determined? Simply put, any application that a local authority receives for the establishment of a township, subdivision of land, any change in land use, as well as any authorizations contemplated in the NEMA, must be passed on by the local authority to the MEC for him or her to comment. This is very important because the MEC doesn't reject or approve that application. He is just simply given the right to comment in and around how that application can potentially impact the determined route. The approval still vests with the local authority in and around such an application. So this is Section 7 then just gives more detail in terms of that process. Moving on then to what would be the second step of determining the future rail reserve. So we've gone through the route determination. A route has been determined, the 400-meter wide corridor. Preliminary design then is the second step in this process of defining the future reserve. It provides a preliminary design of the future provincial railway line. So just to emphasize, in route determination, it is a center line of a 400-meter wide corridor. That is a determined route. The center line and the 2 edges which give the 400-meter wide corridor. In preliminary design, we actually get a preliminary design of the actual infrastructure. So you're able to see, this is the extent of the station, this is the extent of the actual railway, this is where the fence is, this is where the access roads are, etc., etc. If there are tunnels, bridges, however the future railway line is going to be comprised, the detail comes in the next step. It enables then the identification of properties that are directly or indirectly affected by the future railway line. The process is carried out with extensive consultation with due regard of the interest of the registered owners or holders of rights in terms of land, municipalities, service providers, and the environment. It includes a full environmental impact assessment in accordance with the NEMA legislation and provides a basis for proclamation, expropriation, and procurement, and provides more certainty on the possible location of the future railway reserve. So in terms of how the process unfolds, again, the MEC would initiate such a process of preliminary design. As this preliminary design process is undertaken, the design may deviate from the determined route. And that deviation is brought about by the consultation process that happens once the design is subjected to review and comment by all interested and affected parties. But what this is saying is that if the extent of that deviation is on one side of the determined route, it may continue. But if the deviation spans outside of both the dotted lines that shown in the determined route, the route determination actually has to be undertaken again. Again, as I mentioned in the opening slide, the actual pyramid design then must be done in respect of properties that will be directly affected, the interest of the registered owners and holders of registered rights thereof. In respect of properties that will be indirectly affected, access to and from such properties is considered, existing or future services in terms of infrastructure are considered, and the interests of registered owners, holders of registered rights, etc. are considered. Sorry, it's frozen. So, in terms of this pyramid design, it comes with a written report, and as I mentioned, it's subjected to a full environmental impact assessment. My colleague will speak to how that process unfolds. But as members of interested and affected parties, members of the public, property owners, etc., you have the opportunity to comment both in the pyramid design itself, as well as through the environmental impact assessment process, which are undertaken prior to the conclusion of this preliminary design process. Once there is such a proposed design, together with the EIA, the GTIA then prescribes that the MEC must, as prescribed, notify all interested and affected parties in terms of this draft design, the environmental report thereof, and the MEC's intent to decide on the preliminary design. And then the regulatory measures, which are similar to the determined route, where the MEC is offered an opportunity to comment on land use change applications. And most importantly, the interested and affected parties then are given the opportunity in the prescribed time and manner to submit comments with regards to this design and EIA report. The MEC must thereafter consider the preliminary design with due regard to the EIA report, but as well as the comments from the interested and affected parties. And based on the nature of the comments or the inputs, the MEC then may accept the design for implementation with such amendments as the MEC may deem necessary. So again, these amendments would typically come from this stakeholder engagement process. Once the MEC has considered then the design, environmental impact report, assessment report, inputs from interested and affected parties, he or she may thereafter accept the preliminary design and then publish it in the Gazette. If the preliminary design or sections, if it comes to a point where the published preliminary design needs to be amended, what this provision says is that you have to repeat the preliminary design process. So back to this image. So in the route determination, we have a 400-meter wide corridor within which the future railway line may be designed, constructed, operated. But in the preliminary design, what you then see is, as I mentioned, is the actual drawing, the actual preliminary design of the future infrastructure, and you're able to see the exact extent. So it then becomes in certain sections, so the widest point are normally the stations, the narrowest sections are normally in the railway line that connects the stations. So that the extent of this 400-meter wide reserve then reduces in the next phase. As I'm saying, so the widest point is normally the station, the narrowest point is the line that connects the stations. So that can come down to as much as 80 meters in certain instances.
Sorry, 80 or 18?
80. So I've touched on this. So it's similar to the route determination that once there is a preliminary design that has been accepted, after the process that I have outlined, then the MEC is afforded an opportunity again to comment on land use applications, and for emphasis, the local authority remains responsible for the approval or non-approval of such applications. And the regulatory measures that applied after route determination fall away. So in other words, previously the MEC would comment on any land use application that fell within a 400-meter wide strip. After preliminary design, as an example, if the rail reserve is reduced in certain sections to 80 meters, as I made the example, the other 320 meters then is no longer subject to the requirement of the MEC commenting on land use changes. So, the third step in the process of determining the future rail reserve is referred to as proclamation. So this is when we've gone through route determination, we've gone through the process of preliminary design, and the MEC then is in a position to proclaim the land, or to proclaim the railway reserve. So this provides certainty then on the extent of the future railway reserve, and thus the properties will be directly or indirectly affected by the proclamation. It follows route determination and preliminary design. Owners and occupiers of land that will be affected, as well as interested and affected parties, are notified and afforded a further opportunity to make comments or representations in and around the intent of the MEC in proclaiming the land or proclaiming the railway reserve. And again, because it provides certainty on what the actual extent of the rail reserve is, it prevents land speculation in and around that issue. Sorry, may I just catch a sip? So, apologies for that. So in terms of proclamation, the MEC then, by notice in the Provincial Gazette, and after investigation and report by the department, subject to Section 15, which we'll get to now, he or she then may proclaim a road or railway to be a provincial road or railway line. He may proclaim that such a railway line shall exist in any land the width that the MEC deems sufficient. But this deemed sufficient is based on this preliminary design. After the status, so the last two I'll skip. What it's referring to is that the MEC may change the status of a railway line that's already been determined and already been has already been proclaimed. Where a road or railway line is proclaimed over land, the rights to any precious metals, precious stones, minerals, etc., that vested with the previous owner or the current owner remain with that owner. So moving on then to Section 15 of the Act. Before the MEC takes any of the actions in subsection 3, which is coming up right now, the next slide, he or she has to notify the owners and occupiers of the land that will be affected. And this happens in the prescribed, in writing, or by publication in the prescribed manner. And that communication then affords such persons a period of not less than 21 days to make comments or representations in regards to the MEC notifying them of his intent, his or her intent to proclaim the rail reserve, and by extension is basically saying, notifying a landowner or occupier of the land that that piece of land is being considered for proclamation for the future railway line. The person who's been notified, i.e. the landowner or the occupier of the land, then so as part of this process, there has to be compliance then to the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. So as the MEC notifies the owner of the land or an occupier of the land, such steps as prescribed also have to comply to the PAJA Act. Then the MEC then must give due consideration to any comments or representations that are received from such owners or occupiers of the land. And what was on the previous slide then applies to all these items or activities, but for what we are here for today, it's in the context of proclaiming a railway line. So what it's saying is that before an MEC can proclaim a railway line, there has to be written communication to owners or occupiers of land that is affected, and those parties have 21 days, well, not less than 21 days, to make representation in response to such a notice. The MEC then has to consider those representations before he or she may then proclaim the future railway line. Should the MEC proclaim the railway line, the MEC must, within 60 days of making such a decision, inform the owners of the land or owners of the land that is affected by such a decision to proclaim a railway line. And this notice has to be served to such parties by registered mail. Moving on then to expropriation. So there's been a process of determining the route. There's been a process of refining the future railway reserve through preliminary design. There's been then a process of proclamation of a future railway line, and now we're moving on to what would typically be the last step for properties that are affected by this process. So this is the fourth step in the process, where owners of land that will be affected are notified after the undertaking of the three processes I've shared. The MEC must pay in the event where the owner has not already been paid in respect of the expropriated land, the surveying costs, compensation as may be mutually agreed upon, based on the amount the property would have realized if sold on the date of expropriation in the open market by willing seller, willing buyer, and an amount to make good any actual financial loss that may be caused by the expropriation. The owner would remain responsible for the rates and taxes and maintenance of the property if they request to remain in the property after the expropriation. The MEC takes occupation of the property on a date agreed upon between the parties. So, in terms of the actual, how it's articulated in the Act, Section 19, the MEC then may by notice the owner expropriate land or a right in land and cause it to be registered in the name of the province for the purposes of construction or maintenance of transport infrastructure. In this case, it will be a future railway line. Where the railway line or access road traverses a piece of land, the MEC may expropriate land if the remaining portion of that land is no longer useful to the owner. So simply put, as we go through the design process, preliminary design, etc., there are instances where a portion of a property may be impacted, and so as part of the process of consultation with the affected landowner, there may be then a discussion to say, man, we've taken 30%, or the railway reserve is going to take up 30% of your land, and perhaps the remaining 70 is no longer useful for the purpose that it's intended for. There may then be a discussion then to expropriate the entire property. Where land is expropriated, I've touched on the part that the MEC covers the cost of surveying transfer costs, as well as then the compensation that may be mutually agreed upon. I'll move on then to Section 28 just now, which further articulates what the quantum becomes in terms of the expropriation. So again, where the MEC expropriates land or right in land, they must issue a notice and serve it to the owner by means of a notice by registered mail. A notice that contains such a decision must contain a clear and full description of the property or the right in question, state the date of expropriation, and where applicable, the date that the province will take possession of the property. What this means is that there is a scenario where the expropriation may be undertaken, and in this discussion, the owner may request to remain in the property. So that's what the last part is talking about. So the process of expropriation and compensation continues, but should the owner of the property choose or request to remain, then that date must be agreed upon. And then the implication of that is that that owner would be responsible for the maintenance of that property until they vacate. In terms of then, in terms of then what the owner of the property has the right to do is, once they've received the notice, they've got 60 days to respond to the MEC's notification of the decision to expropriate the property. If compensation is offered, and whether or not it is accepted, and no amount was offered or not accepted, the amount claimed and full particulars of how the amount is made up, and full particulars of the improvement in the owner's opinion. So what this is saying is, when the owner responds within the 60 days, they are to respond with what they deem is the value of the property, and they have the right to include what they deem is a cost to any improvements that they've made. If the property is land, then it goes into looking at what was the lease, if it was leased, and then the discussions are based on such arrangement. The owner has the right, or in the response, should they desire for the documents not to be, or the correspondence to continue directly with them, they've got the right then to have an alternative address, maybe an attorney or a relative or whatever the case is. So again, then 28.1 speaks about what is the quantum of the compensation for an expropriated property. So again, it's the amount that the property would have realized if sold in the open market, an amount to make good any actual financial loss caused by the expropriation. And in case of a right, so at times there's an expropriation of a right and not the actual land or property, an amount to make good any actual financial loss that may be caused by taking or expropriating such a right. In extreme or in very rare occasions, there are properties that have no price in the market. Such compensation then is determined on the basis of the amount that it would cost to replace the improvements on the property, having regard for depreciation as determined on the date of expropriation. So over and above the quantum being the cost of the property, consideration of the improvements or the cost of the improvements that the owner deems should be part of the quantum of the expropriation, as well as what I referred to in the previous slide, where there's compensation for any actual financial loss that may result on the owner as part of the process of expropriation. There is an additional amount that is then afforded to the owner of the property that's been expropriated. And 28.3 then just deals with how that quantum is calculated. So it's on a sliding scale where it's 10% of the first 100,000, 5% between 100,000 and 500,000, 3% between 500,000 and a million, and another 1% for what is above a million in terms of the value of the property. So that is how then, in terms of the act, the quantum of the expropriation is realized. 28.1 just speaks about if on the date of expropriation the transfer has not happened, in other words, if the funds have not reached the owner of the property, for those days that transfer hasn't happened, the quantum of the expropriation then attracts interest, which becomes due to the property owner. So just quickly to sum up what happens when a new railway line has been determined. There is the preliminary design, from which there's an EIA that is conducted for that design. There is a public participation process, after which the MEC then considers those inputs prior to making a decision to accept the preliminary design. If the preliminary design is accepted, then it becomes the basis of the proclamation, and that proclamation then leads to expropriation, where the properties that are affected are identified in these two prior steps, and owners or holders of rights of properties that are affected then are notified accordingly, and the process of articulated in terms of how the quantum of expropriation would be calculated then takes place. Thank you for your time.
Trishana, I'm guided by you and the community. Do we want to take questions now, or we want to deal with the issues of the environmental first before we take questions? Yes.
At what stage are we now? Exactly at what stage are we now?
We've just
What's the next year?
We've just determined the route. Yes.
So what is that in your slides? What stage is that?
Stage one.
Stage one. We are right in the beginning.
Can we see the route?
Huh?
Can we see the route?
Yes. I think he had showed it on the. Okay. All right. I think we'll find a better view of what do they call it of the diagram itself. Okay. So I guess we've decided now we're taking questions now. Yes. Can we move the mic around? Because people are going to ask.
Copy of the PowerPoint, can you have access to that?
Yes, no, that's a public
How do
document.
you get access to that?
We will make sure that Trishana, we will give it to Trishana. In actual fact, I think if you've got a memory stick, we'll move it to Trishana right now. Okay, yes, ma'am.
What are the time frames that you are actually looking at? For each
What happened to the
stage?
microphone? Oh.
Hold on, can I just ask a question in the meantime?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, now when you've got that diagram, for me it's very confusing because it's just lines all over the place. It doesn't show the major roads or intersections or anything like that. So I mean, if I want to look at my own property, I don't know where exactly in all of those lines, you know, they must be specific. They can put in roads like Jansmats or Main Road or whatever, so that we can find out exactly where we are.
Okay.
And also possibly with the property outlines, you know, the earth described, because I mean, if you've just got a line coming through there, you don't know which urban it falls on.
Okay. So
It's very unspecific.
just past the order they call it. There was a question here about timelines of where we are and how long everything will take, so that.
So basically, what are your time frames that you're looking at for each stage? So I understand that you've now just done the route determination.
Yes.
Okay, so that's as it may. So how long's the next piece going to take? So, yeah, and when are you anticipating starting construction?
So let's go back to what you said. We have a 400-meter strip, and the 400-meter strip that we've determined is you will look that your house is within that 400-meter strip. Then we do the preliminary design and then the detailing of the work itself. Then that brings it down to say that it is that house, not all the houses in the 400-meter strip. So right now, we will give you everything that you need. We'll give it to you with what they call it, with the GIS ARC files at the back, so that you can see that the 400-meter strip runs over these properties, but it would not be that house. And I think that we need to clarify that it's not that house. All you see on what do they call it, on the map is actually the 400-meter strip and the center line of where the 400-meter strip runs. And that the yellow line that runs on that center line can be moved up, down within the 400-meter strip, unless something that comes up from the EIA says you cannot even go in that 400-meter strip. So I need to clarify that so that we all are accountable that we've determined an area that says this is the area that will be affected, 400 meters, fence line to fence line. And then as we continue, it narrows down to 80 meters, fence line to fence line. And then ultimately at that point in time, you also have a detail of what structures you have in that space. For instance, when we look at your area, we've got a tunnel coming out of something, and then we've got a couple of viaducts and a little bit of a strip that is looks like it's at grade, and then it goes into tunnel again to go underneath the Randburg CBD. And all of that as yet it was for us to be able to determine how much this is going to cost, and as we get deeper and deeper into it, what it will do. In certain cases, you're going to find that our ability to connect out of Sandton and into Randburg and then come up on the top, it might not even be possible. We would have to run all the way underneath and then reappear in Sandton in order to call it.
Yes, please, do it underground. It will save us lots of trouble.
It'll save you a lot of time
Okay.
and heartache as well.
All right. In terms of timeline, ma'am, we are looking at from now, as we start the preliminary design, to the point where we have a shovel in the ground, 3.5 to 4 years time.
4 years.
Yes.
Where did your shovel first start?
To the first person who agrees to sign.
Sorry,
The gentleman here had asked for the mic. Oh, you've got the
Okay.
mic. Okay, so.
sorry, I'd like to ask you, talk about a lot of the compensations around you when your house is actually in the 80 meters, call it that zone. You also talk about the indirect, what makes it an indirect impact? How far away do you have to be? Because as soon as you go through, you've got directly and indirectly.
No.
But as soon as you are in the suburb, you are all indirectly impacted.
Yeah.
Because you're
No, not all. So in certain cases, you're going to find that, okay, so you're now saying to me, and I'm going to make an example. So don't shoot me as yet. It's only but an example. So you've got a business that sits across the railway line, and let's say the railway line. So let me give you an actual example. So if you look at John Foster Drive, the railway line as it comes off from Eco Park, it actually runs along the freeway next to a set of buildings. Now those set of buildings and their land is directly affected. And some owners there chose to say, I don't want the property anymore, you keep the property. So we bought it whole. Some owners said, no, I'm selling you only the strip that you need. And you will see some of the buildings are still kept whole. A lot of the buildings on that area was minimum impact, so a lot of the owners kept their building. Some of them sold them to us, and we've kept some of the buildings and we're now using them. So now, in a case like that, there would be an area where you say, the railway line cuts, let's say, my property in half. And as you go past over John Foster Drive, there's a building there, I think it used to be lighting warehouse or something of that sort. It's got a funny shaped roof that looks like this. The owner, we spoke to him the one day and we had agreed on a price. 2 days later, he sent us a lawyer's letter and the price was 8 times what he had, what this property was actually valued. He was actually not directly affected. He was indirectly affected in the sense that we're going to end up with a column in his yard of the, what do they call it, of the viaduct there. And then the next bit of it was then, there was another property owner who said, well, I can't sell this land because now it has a, what do they call it, a viaduct sitting over it. So that's also another indirect way in which people get impacted. In certain cases is that you no more have access to your, you know, the whatever we construct cuts you off and does not give you access to your property. So we're not, your property is, parts of the property are not directly affected, but parts of it are directly affected. So there's different ways in which you could end up with, what do they call it, with a property being indirectly. But it is within the 80-meter strip, and it's about access, it's about where we destroy current infrastructure such as water, sewage, and all sorts of other things. It might not affect the house directly, but it would, what do they call it? it would create some problems that are maybe foreseen by the owner in the future.
So if you're within 50 meters, you've got no structural damage to your property from the station, from a pylon, you're within 50 meters of the line, your property is going to decrease in value drastically.
That makes you directly.
That makes you
affected.
directly. So the entire Bordeaux is going to be indirectly.
So remember,
That's
what do
gonna
they
be
call it? The
directly.
80 meter strip, if you're saying you are within the 80 meters.
No, I'm saying you're not impacted. You've got no structural damage to your house.
Okay.
I can see the line 50 meters away.
Yeah.
I can hear it every time the train comes past.
Okay.
So I've got no structural damage to my property. So I'm not directly impacted by the line. But due to having a train 50 meters away where you used to have a park,
Yeah.
your property decreases in value drastically.
Yeah.
What happens then?
And it's going to start from now, because people already know that.
No one wants to buy here now already because there's discussions.
All right, but no, that I hear you. I mean, like in terms of the what do they call it? The law itself will consider what is now in the 80 meters, and I hear you, and these are issues you're raising. So we will have to deal with them.
One question. I can understand Gautrain to Pretoria and to the airport relative to what it serves.
Yeah.
Coming to this area, all the way to Cosmos City, into Hyde Park, I understand, to Sandton, where is the economical value that adds to the service you're going to provide?
Okay, thank you. So one of the other documents that we're going to share with you is the economic impact that the Gautrain has caused all around the whole of the province. And it's we had commissioned it with, what do they call it, with an independent consultant, and they did the work and brought back the results back to us. And it has shown that everywhere where the Gautrain has gone, not only have we, what do they call it, resurrected such dead towns as Rosebank, but we've actually within the 5 and 10 kilometer zone actually managed to increase property prices. And that document can be shared with you. It's a public document, it is on our website, but we will make sure that we share it with Trishana so that beyond that, when we looked at it, is Randburg CBD as you look at it right now. If you compare it to what Rosebank looked like before we actually built the station there, they are no far apart from each other. That might have much more degradation than Rosebank had. I mean, Rosebank was already a drug den. There was a lot of people were selling their buildings there and everything else there. At the point at which, what do they call it, I used to be the senior executive responsible for technical services. In the 6 to 8 years that I was doing that work, I used to probably sign off a new property development in that, what do they call it, in that Rosebank area. And I've been proud to see the buildings come up over the years that I had signed off, of people that now, and all of them sell their properties on one simple basis. I'm near a Gautrain station. And the value of, what do they call it, of those properties are now worth more. There are blocks of, what do they call it, of Rosebank that used to be houses that have just been sold off to be put up as, what do they call it, as these 3-floor walk-ups that then become commercial and residential and multi-use developments. But we'll share that information with you, so we have no problem with it. And Gautrain in itself, right from the beginning, was never ever a transport-specific, what do they call it, project. It was always intended as an economic development. You can look at Sandton and look at that whole area in front of our station. And you know, if what didn't happen happened with the people who hold the rights to build over the station, because over the Sandton station there's supposed to be actually a massive tower that would have probably rivaled the Leonardo in itself. But it's another story, and it will go through the courts to be able to deal with that. This gentleman here has been asking for the mic. Can we get it to him?
You haven't answered the timeline yet.
I did answer the time.
3.5 to 4 years now.
Yeah, I'm sure that you had a lot of very clever people in terms of determining the route. Now, I noticed that the route travels through Bordeaux right in the sort of northern corner. Was there any chance of looking at not going through Bordeaux but tunneling under the open reserve, the power line reserve area? where there's no housing, it would have cost a lot less in terms of expropriation, etc., but not affected the suburb the way it has now?
No, remember when we do the detailed design in itself and the preliminary design, those are going to be some of the detailed considerations.
But
can I continue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did give you a chance to what do they call it, to ask your question. So if I can continue. Now, when we go through what do they call it, through the actual detailed design in itself, and I'll be honest with you, one of the biggest mistakes we've made in doing this at the current moment and determining the route and publishing it, we published it as an engineering document. And in essence, what we needed to do is actually be able to publish a simple line that runs through here, and this is the strip of everything else. Now, when we do that, we now determine whether or not this structure here, is it on the ground, is it underground, and as we look at it in underground, now here's the challenge that we sit with. So, a line that is on the ground, for ease of calculation, okay, would cost what do they call it? 10 rands on the ground, and that's ease of calculation. On a viaduct and a bridge, it would cost us 50 rands. When we go into tunnel, it would cost us between 150 to what do they call it? To 250 rands. That's how the price escalates. Now, when you spoke about clever people, eventually we get to a point where we look at, is it everything tunnel? And if everything goes into tunnel, then what does is it then what raises the price and escalates it by those factors that I already call it. Those are relative factors. We have the actual factors on by which it changes, but it becomes much more expensive for us to build in tunnel all the time. It is everything that we will consider. It is everything that is included in the detailing of the design and everything else that we will look at. And the comments one is raising now are the comments that we'll take into what do they call it, into what we look at, and then from then on out. A railway line by its nature has also the secondary challenge, and in particular a railway line like mine, for it to run as fast as it does, we have to maintain certain gradients. The highest gradients we have is at max 4%. And we want to go as smooth as possible, and then you want to get the line to be as straight as possible. And at times, that is where the biggest conflict comes up, because I cannot just do this, because it's a high-speed line. And a high-speed line by its nature has both vertical gradient challenges and also horizontal challenges. So it's not as simple as that. And then what then ends up happening is that we then have to think through then, do I take it up or down? And if I take it up, what does it mean? What does it mean? And so we go beyond just the engineering bit that says the route can run over here, to where now we go down to the detail, and the lady will speak about it, Mahari will speak about it, where we talk about what does this mean in terms of the social impact of what we're doing? What does it mean in terms of the disturbance of communities, disturbance of what do they call it, of livelihoods, and all of that is included as part of the NEMA and the specialized studies that have to be done. All of that will have to be considered as we do the preliminary design, to then get to a point where we say, this is purely tunnel. In certain cases, it's just as simple as us being able to say, well, connecting that point to that point there might not be as easy as that, as us coming out of a tunnel here in the Bordeaux region and then going into tunnel again on the other side. And therefore the entire thing would have to go underground. And that is part of the next step, and us looking at it in its entirety.
So just to follow on to that. So what you're saying is that the route is already determined and we have no alternative?
No,
no, within the 400-meter band, it's fixed. So are we considering alternatives outside of that? And because prelim design is the next stage, the route determination is stage 1.
So,
as I understand.
No, that's fine. I mean, let's what do they call it? Let's give each other a chance to speak. So, the route has been determined in terms of the 400 meter strip. Where the line sits can be moved up and down. But if fatal flaws are found, I mean, Mr. Chang, and that's why I said give him a chance. I know we all want to get to questions, but give him a chance. He explained over and over again. Should we find that anything in that has a deep fatal flaw in it as we're now going into the preliminary design, in itself actually literally sends us way back to the beginning. The law has enabled us to be able to say, no, but you can't build in that 400 meter strip. The details as they are coming up are saying to you where the depot is and where Midrand is, there's a type of grass that only grows in that area called egoli grass. It grows on a particular strata that we couldn't even move it anywhere else because it grows in particular manner. And in itself, the depot had to be moved from its original position to where it sits now. And when we moved there, we found a little frog that is only found in that area. Now we had to shift it more southern, and all of these things are things that we will have to go through as we look at the detailed design. Can we share the mic with somebody else? I think the gentleman across here.
Yeah, thank you very much. The overland route through Bordeaux South will destroy this residential and dormitory suburb. It's been in existence for in excess of 70 years. Whether you move the line 10, 20, 30 meters either side within the 400 meter strip is academic. It still destroys the entire suburb. It will never be what it has been. And the social impact of that is enormous. And the question is simply this: it's not an environmental issue. It's a social issue. It might be environmental, but the destruction of the suburb has to be weighed up against a viable alternative, which is to run the line underground. My question to you is, why is there not a route that is planned underground now, which avoids the need to do any further studies, leaves the members of this suburb in a state of certainty? If I want to move to the coast, I can't sell my house for the next 5 years. This is affecting us now. And we need to know where we stand. We cannot be left in this state of flux while all of these reports and investigations are done, when we know there is a viable alternative to run it underground. That avoids all of the disruption to what is a dormitory area, what is an area that supports thousands of people. And this suburb will no longer exist. The property prices will devalue. People will not want to live here. It will be the end of what we know as a very nice suburb. And this is really the fundamental question. I believe, with respect, that you have to make a decision now, because you owe it to the residents of this suburb to take this line underground. And I have looked at the gradients, and the gradient going into the proposed Randburg station, if that same gradient is followed, it can comfortably go under the Spruit, following the same preferred route, and go all the way underground into Sandton. And it will not affect anybody in the suburb. And we can't sit in limbo for 4.5 years. So my question to you is, we require you to make a call on taking this underground now, because it's impacting everybody in the suburb right now as we stand. I can't sell my house unless I were to disclose this. And if I do, any right-thinking person would never buy it. So the mere fact that we have the threat of an overland railway through our suburb is depreciating the value of our properties before they turn the first sod of soil. So my question to you is, gentlemen, if you are serious about considering the concerns of the community then you have to make a call on this soon. Otherwise, we may be in a situation where this ends up being challenged in court, and we don't want to go that route where there is a viable alternative. Even though that alternative might be slightly more costly, it justifies it. I mean, with respect, the Gautrain has been subsidized by the Gauteng provincial government to the tune of 14 billion since it started. If a little bit more is spent on tunneling under this residential area, not a business area, does it really matter in the long run? We're not against the Gautrain, we're not against the route, we are against the overland section of it. We're fully supportive of what it's going to do for the Gauteng province and all of those good things. However, we cannot allow our suburb to be destroyed. And when you consider damages, and you were talking about expropriation, or the other gentleman was, you must remember something, that if you buy my house for 3 million, I'm going to spend another 300,000 rand having to pay transfer costs and transfer duty, move my house, and other costs that are associated with an ordinary move. Are we going to be compensated for that? The answer probably is no. Therefore, there is going to be severe financial prejudice to everybody in the suburb, and nobody will want to buy property here. So what I'm saying to you, gentlemen, is please, you must make a call on this.
Okay.
Go underground. That is a viable alternative, and you do not have to destroy an old established residential area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Corby, sorry, can I have a follow-on to his questions?
Okay. Just pass the mic on.
Sorry, this is a follow-on to what Mr. Bartlett has said. Firstly, I'd like a confirmation as to which route alignment you've chosen, because in the document issued on the 28th of June, you have 3 route alignments. In that document, it states that route alignment 3 scored the highest. Can we assume that that is the route that's going to be used? Route alignment 3.
Yes.
Yes. Fine.
I'm comfortable with that.
Good. My next question is, he's proposed and has done research on the gradient. Why did you choose to go underground for that short it's 1.8 kilometers. It's a relatively short distance. Why is that going underground when most of the rest of the tunnel, of the line is going underground? Underground, I beg your pardon. No, it's underground. The tunnel is underground.
1.8 is
Yes.
underground?
What I'm saying,
The rest is overground.
that's my point. Most of it is underground. However, you come up for 1.8 kilometers to get to the Randburg station above ground with all those, and there's going to be conflict with the power lines as well. You've got a high power line above the Gautrain. You've got 4 pylons from the route from Hurlingham across to Bordeaux. There's 4 pylons in way. Are you going to remove those power lines? Are you going to lift those power lines? That's going to be a major problem. We're already very, very sensitive about power. So that's another problem. When you get to Randburg, the tunnel starts going under at Republic Road. There's a 600-meter distance to the Randburg station. Is the Randburg station underground? So how are you going to get a 4% gradient for over 600 meters down to underground? That I don't understand. That's going to be impossible. There's no way over a 600 meter. This is 600 meters, less than a kilometer. You're going to have, how are you going to get a 4% gradient down to underground? So that's another problem. In terms of the expropriation, Mr. Bartlett is a conveyancer, so he understands that process. You've got a maximum of 10,000 rand as an addition to what the market value is. That 10,000 rand will not cover any transfer duty on a property that you're going to have to replace.
Okay. Can I deal with this transfer duty thing before we go far with it? I think he repeated it 3 times to say to you that we will pay you for the property, for the transfer duties, and any other inconveniences. It's in the act. And I don't know Maybe we can go back to that particular slide, Mr. Shanga, and show it clearly that it is included. Now, I want to go back to what do they call it. Sir, everything you've said is what do they call it. Makes sense, and we are here to come and listen to you. And it's what I wouldn't be doing this if I was not here to listen. Okay? Second issue, there's the Public Finance Management Act, the same one that you use to be able to summon people to Zondo commissions, to all sorts of other things. If I made the decision you're asking me to make now, standing here, without me doing a proper study and everything else, then you would be the first one to say that. So I agree with you, and I have listened to you, and I'm taking what you've said to what do they call it, to heart. I just want to appeal for you to be able to allow me to run the other processes, and I've heard you, and what we need to then do is then be able to make sure that how do we communicate this in such a way that it creates certainty, and then as soon as possible get my approvals to continue with the next bit of work so that we can then bring on because without me doing those studies and I say, no, I have decided to, what do they call it, to put everything in Bordeaux internal, then, and I have no problem with that. I'm not saying I'm not going to do it. I'm just simply saying I am asking and appealing for you to allow us to follow process and due process. And that's what you would require me to do, because it is your money that I'm spending in, what do they call it, in doing the study. And that is, what do they call it, it's something we also all have to be comfortable with. Your issues have been raised there, and they are the same as is, and it's about us looking at that strip that is between the tunnel coming out of something and then going into Randburg itself. I mean, Randburg in itself has some of deep basements that we would have to consider, and it is noted, and it's something that we will incorporate into, what do they call it, into the design as we are continuing on. I wouldn't have made the time to come and stand here and talk to you if I was just following process. I don't do that. I didn't get a Zondo Commission summons, and I'm not intending to get one soon. But in essence to that, it's over the, what do they call it, the 25 years I've been a railway engineer. I've kept my nose clean, and I'm intending to do so beyond this point. Okay, ma'am, and then we'll go over there. Bring the mark. Yeah.
So I have 3 questions, but I think I need quick answers. So the
is
first
it yes,
one.
no type things?
Pardon?
I'm saying, is it yes, no type things? You said I must go quick.
I think so, yeah. So first you speak about phases, then you speak about stages, and we're presently at stage 1. And at what stage, where you said you had gazetted everything, that we can still reject or have our say? Like where we within the...
Where we are now allows you to raise your issues as you are raising them.
Okay.
And then allows, so let me explain that, because then Mr. Shange didn't deal with it accordingly. So when we're doing route determination, you get to a point where you're saying, okay, issues have been raised about all of these things. Then the issue that he was talking about, that should we go to commission or not go to commission, then the alternative to a commission is, can these things be dealt with engineering? Can we engineer out the problem we're raising now?
Okay.
And we're all collectively agreeing it can be engineered out. And in determining the route, these are some of the things that the MEC had to consider to say, well, do I need to go to commission, or do I need to, can this be engineered out? And we did prove that some of the things that have been raised and the ones that have been raised can be engineered out. We are coming through to come and listen more, because one of the things that, sometimes as an engineer you do is you sit and you draw lines and you do all sorts of other things. And you affect life. The gentleman said it here. And now in us listening, we now are saying, beyond the engineering consideration, beyond the gradients, beyond all of these things that there's a suburb here, there is a livelihood, we have to think through those things. And this is what we're going through right now. It allows for us to be able to say, take all the comments that have come from such an engagement and then build them into the process as we go forward. Now what we need to then make sure is, you know, the gearing of the timing, and that's the biggest issue that lies in this, because once a route has been, you know, some route has been determined and most of other things, then the going back and making sure that the detailed design gets done, and then a decision that then creates affinity then comes up. Then that's the bit of what do they call it, of the timing that we're going to have to manage.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. It can be changed.
So the thing is, it's just about, and I totally agree with the underground tunnel. I mean, how have you calculated out what people's property prices are, and for expropriation, etc., compared to, like, how do you get to the point of, oh, it's going to be cheaper to just kick you all out of your suburb rather than us go underground? Like, how do you get to that? Is my, like, it's not my question. I don't need the whole thing, but to me, I'm like, surely you don't know what each.
Yeah, no, in the initial bit, we're dealing with, what do they call it, with averages that come from that suburb more than anything
and as he said in the slides, you know, when you've got a business, etc., then there's more money involved. Like, how much of that has actually been taken into consideration of businesses within this suburb?
That gets done as part of the next phase, in us detailing things.
Yeah, I think it's also taking home, like, not only homes, but livelihoods, obviously. And then, where else has this, I just know the Gautrain where it is now, but that's a lot of industrial and stuff. Has it gone through any, like, suburbs, like what we're saying? Like, what?
Underground, yes.
But where's it gone besides to the airport and in all these industrial areas, which they don't mind it going over their buildings and their what have you? Like, where else has this been done that you are, because you're not only taking from our suburb, but it's also then over Randburg, Olivedale, etc., etc. So has this been done over suburbs before? And
yes, and the considerations and the discussions as we're having now.
So what sort of suburbs, though? Like,
Sandton, Rosebank.
But I mean, that's more business districts.
No, but I'm saying, so I think it's going to be helpful for us to have this conversation in such a way that
So
the
I'm
more
just
you
saying,
shout at me, I cannot hear.
Suburb,
yes.
Not, you know, we suburbs with home businesses or what have you. We're not suburbs with buildings in Sandton.
I mean, the original line that goes to Park was drawn on the ground on the top. And we even went as far as was a gentleman, I think, in that area just past the Discovery line, where he said, after we had put it into tunnel, remember the same process we've carried out from when we did the first line. And after we had put it into tunnel, he said, no, he doesn't want it under his house. First and foremost, there's going to be vibrations, and he's got a pacemaker, and the electric power that comes from that might affect his pacemaker. So he doesn't want it there. And even after we had shown him over and over again that one is the precautions of us using Sonneville blocks in order they call it in a tunnel. So the Sonneville blocks, we don't have a standard sleeper in the tunnel. We have these small blocks that have a rubberized cover on them that we change on a regular basis, would get rid of the vibration. And then he said, and then that also stops electrical charges from going through. He still insisted that the line must be moved away from under his house in the tunnel. He doesn't want the railway line there and all sorts of other things. So we had to deal with things like that. So we've gone through this process of dealing with suburbs and them raising their issues, and then us considering them, and then making the decision and making the changes.
So was it moved because of his pacemaker?
No, it wasn't moved. It was what do they call it? I mean, we couldn't prove that, and we went around the world looking for studies and all.
But I just think Sandton and those big areas are different from this kind of suburb.
But going down south is similar to what do they call it, to this area. Because we go through Rosebank and then past Rosebank, then we go underneath the M1 freeway and everything else going down south.
But that's all underground. We're talking about above ground.
No, but I don't know if you heard me. I said originally the line was drawn as going above ground, and
I get that,
and the change was made.
No, I get that. But the thing is, what we're trying to say is, you're talking about improvements in property prices in Rosebank, Sandton, whatever the case is. It's not going to improve this property price unless you go underground. If you go above ground, it's ruined. Simple as that. It's a simple,
I did say
simple
I hate
zero.
it.
You can do that. So we can talk about property prices increasing in all other areas, whatever the case might be, and direct lines from here to there. It makes no difference. Whether it goes above ground, it's not going to work. It simply has to go below ground for this suburb to survive. That's as simple as it gets.
I've heard you say, and I've heard the gentleman before,
Yeah.
and I've heard him. So
Yeah, there you go.
what do they call it? There's a lady there at the back that has been raising her hand over and over again. Okay, sorry. Sorry, my apologies. So,
Long time. Hello, thank you.
yes.
I just really have two questions. What made Bordeaux the favourable route out of the three? And then, does a school for 150 children that employs 22 people, does that count as a fatal flaw? Would you consider that in your deliberations? And are you aware that there is a school in the proposed route?
I'm well aware of it, ma'am, and when I had to, what do they call it, as I was preparing for this meeting, I had to look at that over and over again. And I did say to, what do they call it, in my conversation with Mr. Shange, and I said to him, this one is, what do they call it, it's going to be a difficult one. And I do consider that, ma'am, and it is a big issue. And that's one of the things we will look at in changing the design to make sure that it accommodates. There are very few schools that are out there, and I would probably assume the one here in Bordeaux is one of the best ones. So that would be some of our consideration in us looking at the social related issues.
As well as the swim school that teaches most of their swimming.
Okay.
Just saying.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yeah. Just hold.
Yeah, the first question about Bordeaux being the preferred route.
Okay, so, and I want to go back. Let's go back to what do they call to me answering you in full, because I had not answered it in full because this thing just tends to move around. So, in the initial phase of it, when we're determining a route, we do a preliminary cost estimate, and that preliminary cost estimate in itself, it has to make sense of our decisions. And in terms of the cost estimates that we looked at, this is one of those that were a bit favorable. Not all of them function very well. So there's the one that we run the tunnel all the way out to, what do they call it, to Soweto, and that was unaffordable to a great degree. And looking at it, so we will go back and look at it in detail and look at the options, what it means. So you said it's about 1.8 kilometers between end to end between the two tunnels. So that's the kind of thing that we would have to go back and think through, and then be able to say, well, how do we fund this? Because ultimately I cannot go into a project that I cannot afford or pay for. So that would be some of the things. So going back to your question, it was both from a, what do they call it, from a technical position of gradients and most of other things, and route alignment, and then also on cost. So on cost, we then have to go back and say, well, Treasury, the ideas that we had that we could do certain things are not going to work out, because we're going to destroy livelihoods, we're going to create problems in terms of the social issues and everything else. Can we have additional money to cover this area, and that area, and everything else? So we are eternally grateful. One of the things I must say to you guys is, I'm grateful for how we're having this meeting. The last few times it's been rough. And I appreciate that, and we're having this conversation in the most civil way possible. So we appreciate the emotion that is going into this, and we appreciate what impact we've had on a lot of things since the publishing of the road. So let's continue to have the conversation, but we are taking notes. We are making sure this meeting is getting recorded, and therefore also for our own records, we know the issues that have been raised. Okay? Right. Okay, the lady, yes.
The one holding the mic gets to speak.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time this evening and for your presentations and for hearing us. I think it is really important, and I do hope that you are hearing that this is a suburb that people really love and would hate to see destroyed. So if there is any way we can avoid it, we would obviously really appreciate that. My question though is about expropriation, if it does come to that, and the question of the market value and how that's determined, because obviously properties are already losing value here. So when it comes to looking at a market value of a property that nobody actually wants to buy, do you look at relative prices in other areas? How is that market value determined for expropriation purposes?
Okay, so there's the way in which it's determined by, and it's written in the Act itself. And then I'll tell you how we actually dealt with it when we did Gautrain one. So the initial bit of it is that we get a valuer, and the valuer says this is how much the house is worth, and then
How much the house is worth if the Gautrain weren't happening?
yeah, no, it's the property value as it is. That's the house and that's where it sits and everything else. If the Gautrain wasn't happening, that's how much the house is worth. Okay. Then we what do they call it? Looked at. Then we would on the direct letter that you get sent further. This is the offer on expropriation that we're giving. Then there's the right to reply, and you then say, my house has solar panels, it's got this and that and everything else that goes with it, and my valuer has valued it at this amount, okay? So, and then we go through a process that then says, and then you say, well, I was thinking of building a pool, that you must include too. And we go, no, you were thinking about building a pool is not a pool, it's you thinking about it. But what we will do is then look at, all right, this is how much we say the house is valued, this is the value on that you and your valuer have brought in, and then somewhere in between the two prices then becomes the number on which we settle. In certain cases, we find that a lot of times we've paid above that, above what do they call it, what we had valued, and sometimes even above what do they call it, the valuations, and we for us it's also about keeping somebody whole about their property. So it is not a one way. So we're not going to walk in and say this is the we're expropriating, this is the value that we've determined. It is a process that we go through. The same way he said to you, if you choose not to deal with us anymore, you don't like my face anymore, then you want me to deal with you through your lawyer, we've done that. There are properties that we've settled all along the route and everything else. And then there are properties where the owners have held out and have fought it through and through. And we probably are getting 10 years after the Gautrain has been running, getting to the point where we are about to close the curtain on that, and there will be a determination of sorts that will have to be made by the courts. We prefer not to end up there. For us, it's about the project and it's about the people and the benefit more than anything else. And we would rather settle at an appropriate value that then means you're not left without, what do they call it, a home or the ability to get another home. We would prefer, and that's always our stance, we would prefer not to go to court. Okay, ma'am?
Thank you again for being here and for having this conversation. I don't have a question. I'm just following up on the opportunity for you to listen. And there may be other opportunities you've outlined, that there's various stages where we can comment. But I want to speak for the spirit of the suburb. There are others who have spoken about that as well. But the history of this, not just going back 70 years, but we arrived in the suburb about 15 or 16 years ago when it was a crime-ridden suburb. We ourselves were hijacked twice in the space of 6 weeks. And slowly but surely, step by step, this suburb has worked together, street by street, to create a safe, not just a safe environment for us to live in, but a place where there's life, where you can walk down the street There's young families with prams, with toddlers. The park is alive. It's used every day. There's parties, you see balloons around the suburb. There's a spirit here that is intangible, that doesn't equate to rands and cents. But it feels like we have built something that we appreciate, something that we love, and we would not want to lose. And so would just want to speak that, when you talk about social impact, to speak that emotion into the story along with the rands and cents.
Thank you, ma'am. And I think that at this point in time, I'd like to be able to appeal to you at the level of the humanness of what you're talking about. So, I live in an estate in a gated community. I have been on the board of the trustees for as long as I've been in that estate, which is since 2013. I have chaired the board of that estate for probably 5 years, in that 9 or so years. That is all of that. And my need for me to do that was in and around ensuring that the life I had bought into continues on. So I don't come from the middle of nowhere. I come from a community too. And so the appeals you're making about the sense of community, I have the clarity of mind because I sit as a board, a trustee in a board of a homeowners association. I am comfortable with everything that that you are raising. And the houses, that we have there, we would love to protect them as much as you do. So I hear you clearly when you speak about such things. I'm not, you're not talking to somebody who does not understand the sense of community. I understand clearly, and I understand what it means to you and what it means to your kids. My house is actually next to the boundary wall. So one of my other issues with being on the board has always been in and around security. Since 2013, in the 9 years I've lived in the estate, we had only one incursion into the estate, and it was orchestrated by the security company that worked for us. And we manage those things clearly. So I come from a community that values the sense of community, and I partake in what has to happen because of exactly what you just raised on. So I hear you clearly. Yeah.
For this to go away, there's only a simple solution, just to go totally underground, and that's it. So the reference to that, would you go totally underground?
Yes, we will consider it. I mean, it is only fair. I mean, the process that we have to follow in itself clearly says if there are social issues that we cannot, deal with, then we would have to consider an alternative, and that is one of them, going totally underground. So I'm comfortable with it.
Hi, so I read your environmental preliminary impact assessment, and the thing that concerns me greatly is the fact that the visual and the noise impacts were not even mentioned, nor were they even assessed. Now, an environmental assessment practitioner, known also as an EAP, worth their weight in gold, would know that noise and visual for such a project are your impacts that will be the highest and that cannot be mitigated. The only way it can be mitigated is by going underground. Now, those impacts were not even mentioned, and that is, for me, extremely disturbing, considering that the majority of the Gautrain line, this proposed route, is going to be above ground. That the biggest impacts were not even mentioned in your environmental assessment report. Now, environment is not only the little animals, down in the Spruit. It's your human environment as well. Now, you talk about the social and that you understand that we live in this beautiful place. Yes, sense of place is very important to the suburb, has been mentioned multiple times. The fact that that wasn't considered in the preliminary report. I'm very concerned that your EAP is not up to the task of doing the job properly. And then also, when I submitted comments last year, I did get a response saying that my comments had been received, but after that, it was crickets. Now, surely an EP who does their job properly will make sure that they have the list of all the people who've registered as INAPs, and would communicate with them saying, okay, well, the following reports they've been issued, published, etc. Because that I am an EP myself, so I know that this is what we're supposed to do, and the fact that it hasn't been done makes me wonder about the independence of the EP that you have appointed. So, fatal flaws, the fact that you haven't even looked at visual impacts, that you haven't looked at noise impacts in your reports, and I'm concerned about the public participation process. We have a residents association in the suburb. They were never consulted last year. So as far as I'm aware, if they were they? Okay, well then that I retract. But the fact is that those of us who registered when we eventually found out about this project, and there was no further communication after that, that does not give a good image. Now I know you want to do the right thing, and I appreciate that we're having this meeting now, where we can raise our grievances. And so there's my grievance and my big concerns that the major impacts were not even looked at in your preliminary environmental report.
Okay, so
Can we still
so
this lady? She has a hand for not being
let me take the lady before I end up in trouble.
Hi. You speak about Sandton and Rosebank. Those are very affluent areas. Most of the businesses there are top businesses. So money's being poured into those areas. We're just a normal suburb, family-orientated suburb. Most of the Gautrain will be above ground. Now, when you reach Randburg, CBD, what is going to happen to that area? Are there going to be businesses, like Sandton and Rosebank? What's going to happen to that area? The other thing is we are very close to Rosebank, Sandton, all the areas. That's one of the reasons people live here. Olivedale and that isn't really, they're not affected. They're far out. So to say that other suburbs are going to be affected, it's not the same as Bordeaux. That's just my...
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for taking us through the process. But the first point, obviously, people within that 400-meter corridor want to know exactly where they are. Could you then make a map showing all the urban overlaid with the 400-meter corridor so that it's clear whose house is going to be demolished? And if you're not in the corridor, how you're going to be impacted by the noise and disturbance of the train, even though you're outside the 400-meter corridor. Secondly, the lady up there mentioned about the getting paid out for the house, and it sounded all very hunky-dory about getting to a reasonable price. But if you could just clarify with reference to your slideshow, where my understanding was that the price offered will be the price that the property is worth at the time that you receive the letter of expropriation, which of course will be a fraction of the price now. And thirdly, I'm actually a resident in Craig Hall, and I'd like it recorded that these comments regarding Bordeaux also apply to Craig Hall. You're going over across the river, and we're going to be also affected in the same way as the Bordeaux people by the overland section in their area. So I'd like that also.
Sorry, the overland, the section's only going through Hurlingham, not through Craig Hall.
There's an overland section across the river. It crosses Maxwell McDonald Drive.
No, it's through Hurlingham. That's why I
clarified. Well, I'm in Craig
route.
Hall, not Craig Hall Park.
I understand that. I lived in Craig Hall and Craig Hall Park. The route 3
does not go into
Well,
Craigmore at all. It
our
goes through to
property, as
Burlington.
far as I can see, is right on the edge of the 400-meter corridor. So that's why I'm concerned, and it does affect Craig Hall.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Ma'am, you did raise the issue about the IP and everything. So some of these issues were raised, and I said to you, when we do route determination, some of the things we look at them and say, can this be engineered out, and can we make a decision later on that deals with the engineering out of those processes? And we at that point in time agreed that some of these things can be engineered out. So the detail, just hold, the detail of what then comes after that, because we're not yet where you, because the original one was just a simple desktop scoping study for a route determination. We had not done all the specific studies that go under the NEMA. We have not done every other thing. So that is done as part of the next phase for us to deal with what do they call it. And I don't want to argue the point out. I just want us to be able to say there was a point at which we made the decision, you know, some of these things can be engineered out. We're having the conversation now, and we still agree that taking the, what do they call it, the system into tunnel, that's engineering it out and putting it into, what do they call it, into an environment that doesn't affect you and doesn't, what do they call it, it changes completely the complexion of the conversation we're having. So if you allow us to actually be able to do what we have to do, I have noted your issues and your concerns, and we then will, what do they call it, we'll take it from there. Ma'am, I've noted your concerns and, what do they call it, and everything you've raised, and I am clear about it, and just like the gentleman from Craig Hall, we are considering the whole line and what effects it will have on communities, on different areas, and everything else. And this whole conversation we've had here, what I've loved about it is nobody has said we don't want anything that has to do with the Gautrain here, unless this lady says, you know, he doesn't want it at all. So then that's a different issue. But for me is you are asking us to consider other ways in which we can go through your suburb, and I'm comfortable with that, and I'm happy about the conversation we're having. Yeah.
Just one last question, and then I'll shut up. Is there any circumstance where this extension might get scrapped? In other words, for some reason,
while we were having a good conversation.
I'm trying to figure out from a timing point of view. We're going to go through all this process, and then we get to a point, and then there's no more. And then you're not going to do it, or Treasury says no just before you do proclamation or something like that. So is there a circumstance where we'll get further down the line, and then somebody will say, right, no, we're not doing it.
Somebody said something about ESCOM. As it is right now, so one of the things that we did is as we went through the initial part of the preliminary design and the pre-feasibility and everything else, we brought in rating agencies externally, because remember at some point in time our sovereign debt became a bit of a complication. And in its assessment and at both our ability to borrow money externally and internally in the country, we are still regarded as a AAA agency, as an agency alone. And we also are regarded as Treasury as one of the best places for you to place money for it to get spent and spent on the right places. Now, that might change. Somebody might look at me one day and say, I don't like this guy's yellow tie. And then decide, no, I'm not going to fund him and all stuff about it. So I cannot guarantee you. But as it is right now, we are regarded as the one place in Gauteng to place money for it to be spent and spent on the right things. So the chances of somebody just at a whim deciding that they're not going to spend money on any further expansions and all of that, and you will see when we share the study with you on what it has done to the economy of, what do they call it, of Gauteng as a whole, and what it contributes year on year in both taxes and, what do they call it, in GDP. Even if the political parties change at the top, you would be a strange human being to make a decision not to do this. But I'm not saying it won't happen. I look at retiring in the next 5 years. It might happen beyond that, so I don't know. But while it's under my watch, I will, fight for us to do the right thing. We estimate that this one phase alone, going to Little Falls, will create 100,000 jobs, direct jobs, and then post that, with all the economic activity that will occur in and around Randburg, the area out on the other side, there'll be an additional 45 to what they call it, 50,000 jobs that will be there, just because of the areas. And where we've placed the stations, we've placed them intentionally in areas that allow what do they call it, for commercial development above that. So that will be helpful. We just need to manage the issue of how we're dealing with the suburbs and and communities and all of that. For me, I think it's a viable direction to go. And we've also shown the municipalities that their rates in the areas where we go through have increased substantially, and they are very keen on being able to give us some of their land for us to use it to do certain things. So it's for us to look at the detail now, to go into the things that we need to look at. If it means going underground for me to get this done, then I have to crawl with my knees from the door when I get to the minister's office to go and ask for the additional money that I need. So I'll do that. Okay?
There's something I would like to ask, because I'm just simply ignorant of it. Sorry, there's something I'd just like to ask because I'm ignorant of it. Do you have your own power supply?
Sorry?
Do you have your own power supply?
In terms of the house?
For running the train, because I mean you're developing something that runs on electricity, and 2 weeks ago Bordeaux was out for 12.5 hours. So I just don't see, if you don't have your own power supply, I don't see it as being viable, or you're going to sit with the train there forever.
It is an important question that has to be asked. So one of the things that we've done now, so when we did the Gauteng the first time, power was plenty. But one of the first few things that we even on the current system is, about 2 months back we put out a study to look at solar powering all our stations. And then in addition to that, then the excess power that we'll make from all the earth that we have on all our stations will be fed back into everything else. Now, in certain cases, we've looked at it and said we can't feed it back. We will feed it out to the neighboring suburbs, and we are looking at becoming an IPP as a company, an independent power producer. So that is an important part. But beyond that, what we're also looking at in this particular design is us ending up with buildings that are solar and energy passive. So the manner in which you place them and the manner in which you design the ventilation, and it has its own natural ventilation, which does not allow temperatures to increase or decrease between a certain band to a great degree. So that's some of the things that we've looked at. And so we're looking at first the stations and the parkings and everything becoming energy neutral, so make their own power, and then we will remain with what do they call it. One of the things that we're also considering is there's been a train that has been launched by Siemens, by Alstom, and everybody else that runs on hydrogen. So that's another alternative that we're looking at for this current expansion, long-term wise. So it is those things that are here that, every time I say hydrogen, so for instance, I've got an electric bus that is testing around town. It's the first of its kind that is made here locally. To buy a normal bus, 12-meter bus, it's about 3.5 to 4 million rands. To buy an electric bus, that will cost you 1.5 times, so it gets to 6 million rands. To buy a hydrogen bus, in the number that we can produce it at the current moment is 10 million rands, which is almost close to 2.5 times what you pay. So the more and more we can create that sort of energy neutral type of industries, and it's fully accepted, the more it will be easier for us to do this thing. There's a gentleman up at the top that wants to. It's one of the things that I love a lot. the issue of energy neutrality, and I can sit with you for hours and talk about it. Yes, it is feasible. Yeah.
I just wondered if it was time, and I'm so grateful to you for your input. Is it time for us to move on to the next presentation and perhaps hear from Mahadi? Because maybe there's information there that will inform our further development and our thinking.
No, I'm happy with that. I just, you know, we want to try and make sure that we hear everybody. And, okay, they said there's one more gentleman, you know, if you want to get your saying, you know, stuff your head.
I'll try. Thank you very much. Again, it's been an illuminating discussion we've had here this evening. Michael, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, it said that from the time now to the time that once all the approvals and that go through, you're looking at about 4.5 to 5 years before shall we say, the first sod is turned. If we say if we're at the end of stage 1 now, at which stage can we expect to see the reports of the final route determination? So in other words, we've got this 400-meter wide strip going through Bordeaux, of which a thin line 80 meters wide can be carved through at the designer's discretion, sort of thing. When will that 80-meter wide route be established, so I do know that rather than my house being on the edge of the 400-meter strip, that I'm actually going to have a pylon going through the middle of it? When will that final map or whatever be made available? And then also, at which stage from today, if we can say it's going to be 6 months or 18 months, will we know, are we going to go above ground or underground? Are you able to give us approximate dates on that?
So I can give you approximate dates based on us looking at if I got all my approvals today. So once I got all my approvals today, then cyclically in terms of what do they call it, of budgeting and what needs to be done, then I can get money in the adjustment budget in November, which is very highly likely. In the 8 years I've worked for government, nothing ever comes out of the process of the adjustment budget. It is adjusted, but it is adjusted somewhere else. So then that means the money would be available to me in what do they call it, in April next year. And then from then onwards, we're looking at about a 12-month period of us doing and finalizing the studies. But what we're going to do right now is think through some of the things that we've already published and then communicate cleanly, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that was made in the publishing of the current document is a set of what looks like tunnels at grade and all sorts of other things that were not supposed to go out with the original map of what was used to be able to do the affordability calculation. What was supposed to go out was supposed to be a fence-to-fence 400 meters with a straight line in the middle. With us simply saying, and I'll take it up front, and I've told the previous people I met with, is that we've communicated like engineers. And I'm an engineer, and I'll say what do they call it? You know, as they ask, you know, how do you know that an engineer is an introvert? You know, he looks at his own shoes when he talks to you. How do you know that he's an extrovert? He looks at the other guy's shoes. It's not the best communication group of people. So, and I'm the first one to take it and say, we have not been the best communicators in this. And we've let out a whole lot of documents that then made you, and to a great degree, maybe it's providence, and we're able to have the conversation and saying, this area here should purely be internal. We would prefer it that way. But in actual fact, the line, what was supposed to be published was supposed to be a fence-to-fence strip with a center line in the middle that just says, we are still considering what to do with these areas and all that. And we haven't done the best. And I'm the first person to take blame for that. It was done under my watch, and we should have been careful with the manner in which we published all the information. So I'm happy to take the knock for that one. Are we gonna go with the proposal that was given that we go into the environmental? I think she's just simply reinforcing. Mkhadi, they say they want to hear from you. But while Mukhari is connecting, I want to raise my appreciation again. This has been the most civil I've ever done this. Even in 5 years, in 2005 when we did this. Oh, yes, thank you, sir. It always is a painful process, but the community of Bordeaux, I might consider coming to you here. You are nice people. Okay. Can I deal with an online question while we were on the record? Yeah.
The question is the expropriation figure calculated on today's rates? And if so, is there a specific date at which the market value is pegged?
Yes, as it says in the legislation envisages on the time when we're doing expropriations. We're not yet at the point where we're doing expropriation. At the point when we do the expropriation, then that's when we now are saying that house needs to be, and then that would be at the time at which the market rate is determined. Yes.
The second question is, what research reassurance has been done in this regard that the community does not suffer?
This is not the first time we're doing this. We've done it before. We've paid out everybody except the ones that held out on us, and now we are in the final throes of what I think we have four properties out in Samrand where the land sits over Dolomites and most of other things, but the guy wants astronomical figures for it. But they are all in court papers, so let me refrain from talking about that. Yeah.
I think some other questions were asked. I'll ask other questions after more.
Okay. Okay. I actually need to.
Good evening. My name is Mukhadi Manamela, and I'm the executive manager for SHEC at GMA. Mine today was not to explain the entire EIA process, but just to give a highlight on our rights as the citizens of South Africa, our rights as the impacted and affected parties. As the COO has already said, and also as Victor has already said, we have not done the EIA yet. We're not at the EIA process yet. So this is just an engagement, and also to give awareness as part of our duty of care, to say that this is the awareness for your rights and what you need to know with the coming EIA as it comes through. Okay. Sorry, I'm having a bit of an issue with the book. Okay, so the contents of my presentation is going to be your rights. It's going to be the NEMA principles, what is an EIA, the EIA frames, and public participation. All right, as per the section 24 of the Constitution, those are our rights as the citizens of South Africa. Everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to their health and their well-being, and to have an environment protected for the benefit of the present and future generations through reasonable legislative and other measures that prevent pollution, ecological degradation, that promote conservation, secure ecologically sustainable development, and the use of natural resources while promoting a justifiable economic and social development. I think today the main focus was on the economic and social development. So as Gautrain, we want to just highlight that we care about our communities, and we care about the economy and the social development of our communities. Okay. And then in NEMA as well, we've got our rights that have been stipulated. We have a right to be consulted on the impact assessment. You have the right to participate in dispute resolution. You have the right to report on environmental risk. You have the right to information and for decisions to be taken in an open, transparent manner. You have the right to access information held by the state and organs of the state which relates to the implementation of the act or any other law affecting the environment, the state of the environment, and the actual and future threats to the environment. You also have a right to demand that the environment is taken care of. You also have a right to legal standing to enforce environmental laws. So I'm glad that we've got a community that is vocal and that is present, and that will make an easy public participation as we move forward. Okay. So the EIA in NEMA is defined as a systematic process that recognizes and analyzes environmental concerns and impacts due to the development activities and evaluate the impacts before authorization is considered. Okay? So the functions and the purpose of the EIA will be your sustainable development to minimize or, if possible, avoid negative environmental impacts rather than mitigate them from beginning of the project. So that's why we do the EIA in the beginning of the project. And also to inform the decision-making process by clearly presenting adequate information. So information received from the public participation, things like your concerns about your house, the concern about the suburb are put into the environmental impact assessment, and that does influence decision made by the authority. Okay, and we've got two different types of assessments. We've got a basic assessment process, and then we've got a scoping and an EIR process. So the basic assessment process is for small-scale activities. It's a shorter process. It's not for complex projects, and it's for familiar and easily controlled impacts. Scoping and EIR process, which is what the Gautrain will be working on, will be your high-scale activities. It's a longer process. It's for sensitive and complex projects, and it's for significant impacts. Things like your community, your social impacts, economic impacts will be considered in the process. Okay. The EIA process would take 300 days, but if the report needs to be corrected or redistributed, maybe something was not followed or a process was not followed properly, 50 days will be provided additionally to do so, making it a 350 days process. Okay, I just want to highlight the public participation process there, which takes 30 days, and the other participation process here. So at Gautrain, we follow the law, and we'll make sure that the EP that is appointed will follow the process, and taking into your comments that were taken in today, they will help us as well to make sure that the EP that is appointed is looking into each and every study to make sure that an extensive study is made. Okay. The role players in an EIA process, we've got 4 role players, which is the applicant or the developer, the person who wants to take on a listed activity, and therefore is the person who will obtain the environmental authorization. We've got the competent authority, who is the person who will give grant or refuse the requested environmental authorization. The environmental assessment practitioner is an independent person appointed by the applicant to manage the environmental impact assessment process on behalf of the applicant. And during the public participation, the stakeholders are allowed to look into the EP and make sure that the EP is qualified or is following the right process. If the EP is not following the right process, the interested and affected parties are allowed to raise a concern and dispute. And then we've got the interested and affected parties or the public. Those are the people who have the right to participate in the environmental impact assessment process and comment on the application. So these 4 role players have the responsibility during the environmental impact assessment process. So the interested and affected parties or the public, They may participate in the application process. They may comment on any written communication submitted to the competent authority. They must comment within the specified or agreed timeframes, and this will be stipulated by the EP. They must send the copies of any comments to the applicant or the EP, or if they have submitted directly to the competent authority. So they are allowed to submit directly to the competent authority. They must disclose any interest they have in the application being granted or refused. Okay? And they can appeal the final decision. And the process takes 30 days. Okay. Who is an interested and affected party? Although anyone can participate, there are groups of people that are of a proposed development, and they are registered as interested and affected parties. Those people might not be on this list, all of them, but if you feel like you should be on this list and you're not on the list, you are allowed to form part of the list. So it's not restricted to this list. So the owners and occupiers of the land adjacent to the site where the activity has to be taken, and any alternative sites, the owners and occupiers of land within 100 meters of the boundary of the site, and alternative sites. So it's not restricted to 100 meters. The municipal council of the ward in which the site or alternative site is situated. The municipal in which the jurisdiction of the area is situated. So it's not restricted to this list. There can be more people who are allowed to be the INAPs. Okay. The INAPs also have rights that are stipulated in the NEMA. As a registered INAP, you have the right to comment on the following reports: on the basic assessment report, including the basic assessment report that is rejected and sent back to the consultant for amendments and then resubmitted. You have the right to comment on the scoping report, including the scoping report that has been rejected and sent back to the consultant for amendments and then resubmitted. You have a right to comment on the environmental impact assessment report. You have the right to comment on the draft environmental management plan. You also have a right to comment on any final report submitted by the specialist reviewer. So the department also, or the competent authority reviewing the application, must also provide assistance to any person who wishes to object the application or lodge appeal against the decision, and the person is not able to do that himself or herself due to illiteracy, disability, or another disadvantage. So it looks into a wide spectrum of the interested and affected parties. Your rights as also continues. You can expect or insist on being informed about the development and its environmental impact. You have the right to express your concerns and to ask questions and insist on answers, as we are doing right now, and that we will do also in the formal public participation process. You can offer suggestions, you can offer mitigation ideas, viewpoints, and even if you are able, your own expert opinions. So I'm glad we've got EPs in our midst that can provide their own expert opinions and insist on the response of those. You also have a right, this process of public participation is not a process that will necessarily stop the project, but it should result in a project that is environmentally sound as possible and takes into consideration the concerns of the community. Normally, the EP will hold a meeting where he or she explains the development or the activity and asks what your comments are. You are allowed to keep your own record of the minutes of what is said in the public participation meeting. You are allowed to compare the minutes to the minutes that are submitted by the consultants and ensure that the consultant's version of the minutes includes the issues that you have raised, just to make sure that everything is done in order and is done according to the law. And that's the end of my presentation. It was just... Thank you.
So as Makali said, we have one of the most sound environmental legislations in probably in the world. I'm comfortable to say that, and having been doing projects for so many years, one of the things that I've learned is, simple things like, as I say to a lot of people, I've been in the railways for such a long time, I probably know my blood in my veins, I've got trains in my veins. That in itself has allowed me to be involved in various projects. So when we did the Transnet Capital expansion, I was part of the projects that did that. And one of the key projects that we were completely stopped from doing anything that we want to do. The community wanted us to make sure that the iron ore down in Saldanha is, we put water on it all the time so that it doesn't create the dust. So if you go to Saldanha, you'll see the houses across the bay, the white ones normally look pink because the dust gets picked up and then it sprays the water they call it the houses. And we wanted to put a borehole on the beach to extract water from the sea. And when we went through the process, environmentally there was not sound, despite the fact that for us, that was the best solution that we could have ever come up with. And eventually, after a while, we had to consider moving the borehole further and further back into the, we had to find innovative solutions to deal with that. So the law does, what do they call it, throughout the Transnet Capital Expansion Program, we were audited by the Green Scorpions 15 times. And many projects I get involved in, you know that, what do they call it, if you don't follow this law, it carries a 25-year jail term. The person who did Waterfall, what he did is he declared, so he went for applications bit by bit, instead of showing the entire impact of what's going to happen in that whole Waterfall area. If Waterfall was sent to the competent authorities as a whole, it would never have been approved. That's how powerful the law is. And subsequent to that, there was, what do they call it? There was litigation and ultimately prosecution of the people that dealt with us. And I'm too pretty to go to jail. I'm not getting interested in it, so it's going to be difficult for me. So are we going to take a few more questions and then deal with any thoughts that have come up due to the environmental related issue? The mic. And for me, there's a question here. Oh, you've got a few questions here. Use this mic.
Thanks very much. The participation, public participation process is 30 days. Can that be extended? Sorry, the public participation process is 30 days. Can that be extended to 90 days having regard to the complexity of this matter?
We're able to do
I can
answer
that question.
That's my question, thank you.
We are able to do that with consultation, obviously, with the competent authority, because they are the ones who give us the time frames. But due to the complexity of the project, we're able to ask for leeway.
I wanted to say thank you for your presentation. It's much appreciated, and for indicating to the people here how the whole system works. To answer your question, during the scoping phase of the EIA process, there's this 30-day public participation period, and then during the EIA phase, there's another 30 days. But with the complexity of this, and also during that entire period, you can submit comments. So the 30 days is for the review of the documents, but you can communicate beforehand, during, afterwards. There's a whole process there. My query is just, have you identified yet which specialist studies you're going to undertake for the EIA, or is that still, is that only going to be identified during the scoping phase?
Okay, so we did, when we did the scoping phase, they gave me a map, and that map contained just about every little copy, every little spring, every little patch of green grass and everything else. And that map said to me, I actually cannot build anywhere around here. and which means then it triggers most of the, what do they call it, of the specialist studies to be included. We've learned from when we did it the first time, it's not about us choosing. We don't want to trip up.
And you will do noise and visual, hey?
We will do noise and visuals. And I'll even do vibration tests for you. I'll do one up for you. We still don't have somebody who's a vibration expert in South Africa. We had to bring on a lady.
There's a very good vibration
Okay, no, now.
But if you want the details, I can give
When
you.
we did it in 2005, we had to bring in somebody out of Sweden. So that's how complicated it was. So if you go past the John Foster Drive again, and also along near suburbs like Baklu and all of that, you'll see we have this wall that looks like a very grey slotted brick like that. That brick actually absorbed noise. And that had to be some of the mitigation that we had to bring on, because we had to keep the offices that were there. Well, the owner wanted to keep the office, but he wanted to keep it as an office. And so therefore we had to show that when the train goes past, because the train is extremely quiet, it's the interaction of the wheel with the rail line, especially as it slows down. When it's going at speed, it's extremely quiet. But when it starts slowing down, it creates a screech, especially around the curve that's there at John Foster Drive. So we had to be able to put on those brakes to mitigate the capture of the noise. And we haven't had any complaints from the owners of those buildings. Yep.
There's an online question.
Yeah.
It's asking what method will be used for the environmental impact assessment, and if there will be a wider assessment cost-benefit analysis.
I don't know what the method means, because the NEMA is the NEMA, and you have to follow the NEMA. We are following the environmental impact assessment route. So this is a list 2 activity. So there isn't an option for us to go with a small study.
There's 2 more online. The second one is, will you be buying out all properties on the route before they start any work on the line? You mentioned the issue of paying rates, and what about occupational rent? That's the second one. The third question is, why not spend the money to fix current public transport infrastructure for middle and lower class people? Gautrain is expensive. Those are the questions from online.
All right, I would have been surprised if that one didn't come up. Now, let's agree about one simple thing. I used to live in Belfast, that side, and I moved from there because one of the days I couldn't get home to pick up my child on time. The traffic on that Hendrik Port through there is a nightmare of note, going in and going out of that place. And we've continued to build on all these clusters and estates and all sorts of other things. Congestion is a middle class problem. If you do not sort out public transport, and I know how everybody thinks, if you do not sort out public transport in such a way that it also encompasses that group of people, because it is that group of people that buy more cars and buy more cars and buy more cars. Now, it is one thing to look at one system and say that system should not exist, and you're not creating a country that is responsible enough. Our commitments to COP16 and COP whatever and everything else that have come there, we haven't met them. And we're adding more cars and more cars. Now, here's a statistic you need to know. In the US, the ownership of cars is per 1,000 people, 800 cars per 1,000 people. Which means 1 out of every 8 people you see in the US have their own car. In the rest of South Africa, the ownership of cars per 1,000 people is 130, which is 1.3 people that you see in South Africa as a whole. In Gauteng, the ownership of cars per 1,000 people is 450 to 500. Now, you are going headlong into a crisis that is of note. Now, we need what we need to do with the Gautrain and bring on a service that can then encompass all walks of life. Yes, there's the challenge of the pricing and everything else. We have considered that, and we've considered it in such a way that we price it so that it does benefit everybody going forward. But It is not an option of whether we do it or not. So let me give you another statistic. In 2025, when is 2025? In 3 years' time, the freeway is going to grind down. It's going to grind down. And I'll tell you something else that actually doesn't. It's going to grind down to between 13 and 26 kilometers an hour. That's the freeway. And once the freeway grinds down to that speed, think about what happens to the roads that interconnect back onto the freeway. That would be even slower, and then it would back out into suburbs and further back. Now, when we did the modeling for this particular project, it showed that in 2037, you might think that's very far away from now. The entire, what do they call it, road system in Gauteng, 60% of it will grind down to 10 kilometers an hour. Now, I run faster than that. It would be much faster for me to run to work than for me to actually drive my car. Now, it's for me, I am keen to be able to engage, to spend evenings like this, talking to you guys to understand what the challenges are about building the next phase of the Gautrain, because it is not an option for us to do any other thing. It is, we have to think about future generations. We can think about it now, but I am willing to also listen to the fact that there are communities who are affected, and we need to take it forward the right way. For me, it's about us having the conversation that we've had it today.
If I do break your train of thought. These several points last year where we were open for comment and that sort of thing. To be honest, I missed all of that and the opportunity to voice. From Basra or a concerned citizens side of Bordeaux here, if we're going to ask the group or whatever, is there a central person with whom you're going to communicate? Because there are certain timelines as communicated during the environmental impact where you've got that 30-day window. I would hate for us to lose out on kind of be notified on day 28, sorry, you've only got 2 days to respond. Is there someone, do you have a dedicated person with whom you're going to communicate this and keep the lines of communication open?
We are keeping the lines of communication open. We are allowing for us to do the back and forth. Because it for us is we're starting to build the relationship with yourselves as well as residents and as communities. And as part of process, what have we done with it? We've left the process of getting communication and comments in still open, and we will continue to take that and take it into consideration as we go into the next phase.
Okay, so we do have people in Basra or the residents who are able to pick up that tab.
We will communicate with her directly. We've communicated with the different councillors in the different areas directly through the city, and we've explained the process to them. And similarly to other places that we've been to Sharonly and all of that, we've allowed for additional questions that need to be sent through to be still sent through. So if there's anybody who still wants to send in a question that they thought about and they thought that guy with the yellow tie that talks too much, he didn't give me a chance to speak, you still have the chance to do that.
Then just one final question from me. When construction starts, are we going to start from Sandton moving west, or are we going to start from Little Falls moving east?
What we've learned is what do they call it? Is that the direction of construction normally works with the establishments. Where we can establish quickly more than anything else, and that is also about land accessibility. And when you find that land accessibility in the west, where the small holdings are, people would probably be, and that's from our last, what do they call it, our last experience, that they were more at ease in letting go of the areas and giving us space to start there, and then it was easier to establish from there. And then the second thing is, with sinking a tunnel, there's also the bit of finding the area where you're going to drop the shaft down and then take the, what do they call it, the TBM down and start building in there, and also other things. And that normally takes a little longer. And because of, in addition to it being a listed 2 activity, it has its own specific issues. It takes a little bit longer. So normally it would be the open lands coming back rather than the other way around in this case, because the start of the, what do they call it, of the construction area is a tunnel. Yeah. Is there any other question? We can stay here all night, but I can see.
This issue of the IAP list, where would one get hold of that?
I didn't get that.
This IAP list.
Yeah.
How does one get hold of it?
The extensive portion of it.
The list of interested and affected parties, where is that? How does one get hold of it?
So in the beginning of the process, when the EP is appointed, the EP will make sure that they communicate with the community leaders and put on adverts to say that there's a project that is about to begin and please register your name on this. So the notices are on radio. They will be with your the posters at schools, at malls, and also with newspapers. And that's where you can find, that's where you can register. And on our website. Oh, and Gautrain website.
Okay, some of us have already submitted comments last year. Will we be included on the INAP list or the list of registered INAPs who already submitted comments last year? Because I registered and I said I wish to be an INAP, registered as an INAP and get communications throughout the process, and I never have received any communications. So that's where my concern is. Also, I've been on the Gautrain website and nowhere can you find anything to get to this actual project. So your website is extremely difficult to navigate. And I mean, I can be a techno-peasant at times, but if I couldn't find on your website, and then sometimes somewhere there was a link on a Twitter, page and you'd go to that link and it says for error 404, you know, the link doesn't exist. So there's concerns around that as well. So for those of us, like for example, we're here, you know about us, we all had to sign in a register when we were up. We are technically INAPs, so you should be emailing us as soon as your EIA process starts, or even before. You should be emailing us saying, okay, do you confirm that you wish to remain an INAP for this process, whatever. You have our contact details, so you can contact us. Those of us who have already signed in here should already be contacted directly for this project and not be told, oh, look out for the adverts and the newspapers. We've already signed up to be INAPs, so we need to be consulted directly.
Okay. Thank you. We've noted the concerns, and we will take it forward like that. I've taken an afternoon and an evening to come and engage you guys, and I will continue to do so. I am, what do they call it? I will make sure that Shana has, my contact details. If I don't answer the, what do they call it, your call immediately, I normally call back. I sit in meetings most of the day. Consider directing the business and keeping it running as it is a bit of a difficult process. So I will call you back, but we will make sure that the right contact details and all of that. And you can already see we hire people who know what they're talking about. She's only been with us 7 days, and she had to come and talk to you guys, and she was comfortable about it. She says, no,
called the deep end.
So we appreciate the conversation, and if there are no further engagements, I don't know if it is my right to close this or is it yours? Okay.
Thank you very much, Zebo. It is appreciated. On behalf of David Potter, I've just got something that he sent through for all of you. Thank you to the Bordeaux South Residents Association team for arranging this evening's engagement with the Gautrain Management Agency. And thank you to the Gautrain Management Agency for coming through and so robustly engaging with the residents and interested stakeholders. A long and complicated journey lies ahead for everybody, and I trust that the concerns and comments have been noted and all inputs will be considered accordingly. Please note that the Gautrain is not a City of Johannesburg entity. It is a provincial government entity, and the political oversight of such sits with my colleagues at the Gauteng provincial legislature, which are engaging accordingly with the Gautrain Management Agency team. Continued engagements will continue with them and the Gautrain Management Agency. Thank you again, Councillor David Potter. I think just from my side, thank you so much for engaging with me from the beginning and for having this session with us. As next steps, just to confirm, you will send through the presentation as well as the reports. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, it's now officially closed.
And thank you for being kind.